The first time I ever found a dead thing was also the first time I ever had an unexplained encounter. It happened about 10 years ago, and it still freaks me out to this day. See, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but forest. Not friends, not a lively neighborhood, trees, and nothingness. I was very used to wildlife, and all the animals that came to visit and lived around there. But aside from the odd bit of roadkill, which my mom was always quick to zoom past, I hadn't ever actually came across something that was dead whilst on my own, up and close. Hear me out. I must have been in junior high school at the time, and was taking an AP English and creative writing. I wanted to get the best grades possible, so I had to take a notepad, pen and paper, and head out into the forest. Our teacher was always telling us to write on something. I wanted to immerse myself in the forest. I was feeling pretty great. All sorts of ideas were flowing, when a really nasty smell suddenly smacked me, and just as I walked past the next tree, I saw what was behind it. I'm pretty sure I found the source of the stink. It was a dead deer, but not just a body lying there, looking asleep, like quite often we'd see by the side of the road. This deer had been ripped apart. In fact, I only knew it was a deer as the head, which was not on the body, appeared untouched, aside from no longer being attached to its neck. The rest of it was all mangled, with bits of its insides all strewn about, and chunks of bloody flesh scattered all over. I stood there, staring at it for a moment, thinking what on earth could cause such destruction. And then, I heard a sort of rumbling noise. Now, we might live near a forest, and there are plenty of predatory animals about, but we don't have anything too serious like bears, or what this first sounded like, a large wolf. Nevertheless, you come across that sort of carnage, and then hear a low growl. It's big time scary. All I was armed with was a notepad, bottle of water, and a pen. Nothing to protect myself. That's when I immediately was drawn to rustling behind the trees in front of me, and I saw it. It was probably around 6 foot tall. It looked clearly humanoid and walked on 2 legs. In fact, the whole creature looked like it needed a good meal, just due to how scrawny it was, despite being obviously responsible for the destruction that laid in front of me. It was covered in a really mangy, shaggy-looking fur. It kind of had a red hue to its fur color, but mainly brown. And its spine was crooked, like it had really bad scoliosis, with a head and face that was very much so reminiscent of what I would call a hyena. That's when it just stared me down, and it looked pretty pissed. The best guess I can say is its expression read that I was interrupting a very serious meal, and if I didn't want to become the next portion of dinner, I should probably leave. I kept checking behind me to see if it was following like in a horror movie, and hopefully there weren't more with it, but I didn't attempt to make any move away from the deer. I left, without it bothering me, luckily. A few weeks later, I did go back to that same location. Like part of me wanted to prove what I had seen was real. I didn't see that messed up creature again, and there wasn't any more ripped up bodies or dead carcasses. But I did find what was left of the deer. Just bones. I know what I saw was real. Again, this was a person-sized hyena. Every bit as terrifying as I can describe it. I have a really embarrassing dog, and so far, he likes to hump everything. He had been to the vets and had his special operation, so he can't really cause any harm, just embarrassment. And when I say he likes to share with love with everything, I do mean everything, not just other dogs. There is nothing this dog won't hump, including tree trunks and other things that he finds in the woods. So you can imagine why walks can be pretty stressful, and why I try and find more remote spots for us to go. If he takes a liking to a tree trunk, he can have at it, without me having to explain to some owner that he is just a lover, but there won't be any puppies. So anyway, I managed to find this spot with a lot of trees, and not a lot of people or other dogs. We'd be going there for a couple of months, and things were swell for the most part. He could run off, do whatever, and there was literally nobody else about. Some of the shame, at least, appeared to be lifting. Of course, I always knew he'd meet his match. He's a mongrel mix, kind of average size, but maybe like German Shepherd, so big enough to add extra torment when he takes a liking to smaller dogs. We'd always joked that one day he'd try it on with something like a buck and get a good kick in the face. When he came running back to me that day, tail between his legs, whining, and an obvious bite mark on his back, my first thought was he'd gotten away and gotten into more than he'd bargained for. I was, though, super curious and wanted to go over and see what it was. He was acting really weird, cowering, and I couldn't drag him back to the trees. So, what I saw next would terrify me. What was on all fours you would obviously expect from an animal, but it didn't look right. And then I saw why. Because it came out to stand in front of the trees and then stood up on two legs, just like a man. This animal was covered in fur, a similar color to mange. Unlike my dog, though, it looked very comfortable and natural standing on two legs, and even the arms were just dangling by the sides, like they were meant to be there, not on the floor. A natural human posture coming from an animal. Very disturbing. Oh, and by the way, the bite mark on my dog's back that I saw originally was pretty bloody. Whatever bit into him bit in pretty deep. He had to end up going get his stitches, but that's for later on. Even this thing's head was similar. It looked kind of like a German Shepherd, but its face was somewhat human. And whereas my boy has a dopey expression on his face, this thing just looked mean. Not just the sheer size, but it had a very angry aura around it. Once it saw us, it began baring its teeth and growling. I yelled out. My dog barked, and we ran, and we finally got back to the car. Now, I need to find a new place, because I don't want to invest in one of those long retractable leads, and hope my dog doesn't upset any other men's dogs, or we run into that creature again. That was scary, and while I don't believe in fairy tales or werewolves, I can't deny there aren't things out there that will attract themselves to other animals, like my dog for instance. I believe it wanted to turn my dog into dinner, make it its prey. I grew up on a ranch. It was just like something out of an old cowboy movie, and I loved it. It was a dream like childhood. I always felt comfortable with the horses. They are kind, gentle creatures, and extremely loyal and protective. I never felt afraid when I was there, and I never left. Other kids in the town went off to college, moved away. I just always felt safe, happy, secure, and fulfilled with the horses, which made what happened when I saw him all the more frightening. Even though my parents were both still alive and well, they were getting on a bit, and I had more or less taken over the entire day-to-day management of the ranch, allowing them to just enjoy being there, and kind of retire for the most part. At the time, we had about 10 horses, most of them having been there for several years. My favorite of them all, a mare, her name's Sandy, which I was taking extra special care of. At first, when I heard them nickering and stomping around early in the morning, about 1 to 2 in the morning, I actually thought Sandy might be in labor. So I hurried down to the stables. She was fine. No signs of starting her journey to becoming a mother just yet. but the others were acting strange. They were acting as though something had tried to get into the stables, huddled at the back of their stalls, as if trying to get as far away as possible from the opening of the barn. We do get the odd coyote sniffing around sometimes, and, with a baby on the way, I knew I needed to be extra vigilant. So, I kept the main barn doors closed to keep them safe inside, and decided to do a quick check. Not before grabbing my shotgun first. I never had to kill one. Usually a warning shot was enough for them to run away. And as soon as I got closer to the fencing that surrounds the property and leads out towards a huge forest, I began to feel uncomfortable. I could genuinely feel something watching me. I don't want to fire off a shot unless I had to, since the horses were already spooked and just starting to calm down. Besides, just because I could feel something didn't mean there was something there. Maybe the anxiety from all the stables was just getting to me. I checked all around where the coyotes usually try to get in, but there was nothing around the fence. Having been focused on looking at the ground, when I finally looked up and towards the trees behind the property, I screamed. I may as well shut off several rounds on the gun. That was practically how loud I was screaming, because standing there on the other side of the fence, I could just make out through the shadow a shape, a very tall shape, two bright glowing amber eyes watching me, scanning me, checking me out. My first thought was it was a person, but in a split second, my brain rationalized that this wasn't a person. Even though it maintained the shape and size, this was far more terrifying. Shooting at a coyote is one thing. I genuinely wasn't sure if I could shoot a person though. This thing didn't seem to be moving any closer, just standing there, observing, just like playing a game of chess. This thing was observing, taking the time to take on the situation and make a strategic move. Due to how dark it was, I could make out the outline of their body and the eyes. Then, it emitted a very low rumbling growl. I couldn't hear or see anything aside from me and this thing, except for the horses. The shadows seemed to move a little, and then I heard a couple of barks. By now, I was so genuinely freaked out, the only thing I could think of doing was to aim the gun and fire off a warning shot. That's when there was about a split second of light, and I screamed again, as now I saw the outline of what I thought was originally a man, because although the body looked relatively human, the head was more likely than that of a dog. It screamed at me again, a loud, horrible rumbling scream. Then it shot down on all fours like an animal, and ran off faster than I've ever seen in my life. I genuinely don't even think I have ever been so terrified. When it ran away, it began crashing through the tree line and the trees. I could hear it. It sounded like you took a 20-foot linebacker and had them running at full speed into the forest. It was so loud. I went back to the stables, and I stayed there with the horses all night, tried to reassure them with my presence. The next day, Sandy gave birth, and I continued to sleep in the stables with them for the coming weeks. I don't know what that thing was, but if that thing had came for Sandy, she would be gone, and I wasn't going to take any future chances. Thankfully, I've seen nothing of it since.